It gives me immense pleasure to extend to you all very warm greetings on behalf of Jindal Global University and WWF-India. I'm Vidhi, currently working as Senior Program Officer at Center for Environmental Law, WWF-India, and I'm also a proud alumni of JGU and WWF-India's first batch of LL.M in Environment Law, Energy and Climate Change. Today's commencement lecture is on the theme, Adapting the Global Environmental Laws for Effective Climate Response, and will be delivered by Justice Michael Wilson. To start the program, I request Professor Dr. Srijit, Executive Dean of Jindal Global Law School, to deliver the welcome address. I request Professor to please take over.
Thank you very much, Vidhi. Dear everyone, good morning from India. I welcome you all to the commencement lecture of the LL.M program in Environmental Law, Energy and Climate Change. Our commencement speaker is Honourable Justice Michael D. Wilson, Judge, Supreme Court of Hawaii. Justice Wilson is also a distinguished fellow and eminent jurist of the Jindal Global Law School. He's a well-wisher of the university. Clerkship with Justice Wilson is the coveted opportunity among the students of Jindal Global Law School. We have with us our Vice Chancellor, Professor C. Rajkumar. He's also the Dean of the Jindal Global Law School. Professor Rajkumar believes in collaborations. In a university context, collaboration is knowledge sharing, touching efficiency in delivery and quality to the deliverables. The program LL.M in Energy Law, Climate Change and Environmental Law is a result of such a collaboration between Jindal Global Law School and the WWF. Then we have with us our dearest students, the batch of 2021. I'm sure the program will liberally bestow on them all the knowledge and skills ideally obtainable through a specialized LL.M program. The distinguished speakers of the day include Professor Sridhar Patnaik, Registrar OP Jindal Global University, Professor Vishwas Devaya, Vice Dean, Jindal Global Law School and Director, Center for Postgraduate Legal Studies, Ms. Maulika Arabi, Advisor, Center for Environmental Law, WWF-India, and Professor Anand Prakash Mishra, Director, Law Admissions, Jindal Global Law School. I also acknowledge the presence of Ms. Vidhi Thukral, the master of the ceremony. I welcome you all to the commencement lecture on the theme, Adapting Global Environmental Laws for Effective Climate Response. Our planet Earth is a weather-beaten traveler today, toughened, tanned, and bronzed by global warming. It wasn't this stricken once. It was colorful, blue, green, red, brown, tan, and gold. But the day human hearts stopped leaping as it beheld the rainbows in the sky, leaving behind the bliss of Wordsworth, man and the environment split apart into a tragic duality. It was nothing short of the philosophical duality between mind and the matter. Alienated from the world around us, under the we and it delusion, we insouciantly abuse our environment. Recognizing that environmental problems are caused by the mind-matter duality, addressing any environmental problem should be in the same vein as addressing the mind-matter problem. It requires an understanding of environmental ethics and a planetary consciousness. Hence, environmental law, ideally, as its telos, should have the reunification of mind and matter, and as its ways and means, an orientation in ethics and ontology. Environmental law is an outstanding reminder to the society that human self is what the human world is. A view echoed by Stockholm Declaration, that man is both creature and molder of his environment, which gives him physical sustenance and affords him the opportunity for intellectual, moral, social, and spiritual growth. The concept of sustainable development tells us that we are trustees of the natural order set by forces unseen to us. Polluter pays is the punishment for self-inflicted harm, common but differentiated responsibilities based on the premise that as much as our world is a universal consciousness, it's also a particular consciousness. Precautionary principle calls for a juxtaposition of the self and its surroundings. That's philosophy. The abstract causality behind the concrete reality. The vital energy that propels the efforts of individual and the community to reclaim the earth, its flora and fauna in all its immaculate purity. Justice Wilson is someone who actualizes the said ideal, real in the legal, to borrow an appropriate phrase from Professor Philip Allott. Justice Wilson, the judge in the court, injects social purpose to the high ideals of law, shaping human behavior, prompting an environmental consciousness. But that story, made in the cauldron of his experience, is for him to tell. It's not meant for my dilettantist narration. Once more, I welcome you all to this commencement lecture on the theme, adapting the global environmental laws for effective climate response. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Srijit, for those insightful remarks. I now request Ms. Monica Arabi, Advisor of Center for Environmental Law, WWF-India, to introduce WWF and LL.M in Environmental Law, Energy and Climate Change.
Thank you, Vidhi. Good morning, everyone. Special greetings to Justice Wilson, who agreed to deliver today's commencement lecture. I, along with all present here, we are super excited to listen to you, Justice Wilson, as always. Very warm greetings to all the students who are beginning a new academic journey in the year 2020, which by far has presented us with extraordinary challenges and continue to test our patience and perseverance. 2020 has clearly, is clearly the year which we need to reset and reboot for two things: for humanity's relationship with nature, and how can we see that the nature recoups. So it's my absolute honor to welcome the second batch of LL.M in Environmental Law, Energy and Climate Change to both JGU and Panda family. Well, why did I say Panda family? It's because Worldwide Fund for Nature is represented by Panda in standing posture. Our black and white panda logo has in fact become one of the most powerful and recognizable symbols on the planet. Our panda in India is 50 years old. This November, in fact, we will be turning 51. And she carries huge value and meaning with her, a symbol and standard for conservation and protection of the natural world and our planet. WWF India articulated its mission in 1987 as the promotion of nature conservation and environmental protection as the foundation for sustainable and equitable development, because we strongly believe that they coexist. WWF India is recognized as a pioneer conservation international non-governmental organization in the country, dealing with nature conservation, environment protection, and development-related issues. At the time when the web of life has come under increasing threat, WWF India's attempt have been to find and implement solutions so that humans can live in harmony with nature and leave for future generations a world rich in natural resources and natural wonders, which I'm sure everyone deserves to see. One of our broad programmatic objective is promoting active participation of all sections of society in nature conservation and environmental protection through environment education, awareness raising, and capacity building. Furthering this objective of ours, WWF India collaborated with OP Jindal Global University, which is definitely grabbing international and national attention towards exemplary work they are doing as an academic institution. So in 2019, we partnered with Jindal Global Law School to launch a unique LL.M program in environmental law, energy, and climate change. Believe us, when we coined this and we felt that we should have an LL.M in all these three subjects, there were butterflies in our stomach, because it's a unique program. Nonetheless, it is, and the subject which we planned to cover was as wide as the name itself. So the vision of this LL.M program is to integrate Indian and global perspectives on aspects of national and international environmental law, climate change, and energy, and emphasize on international, transnational, and comparative approach to study the subject, which is very much required in today's world. LL.M in environmental law, energy, and climate change, in fact, is designed to represent an outstanding academic milestone for anyone who pursues this. The intensive curriculum provides a number of courses on contemporary topics in both national and international environmental laws. Our teaching pedagogy is based on the assumption that the students pursuing an LL.M degree have a strong academic background and basic understanding of their specialized area which they've chosen to study. All the courses will be taught by leading academicians, scholars, and accomplished international and national practitioners, because we strongly believe that environmental law is not a subject which can only be learned through the existing laws in a theory mode. You need to have a practical orientation towards it. Other than the core and foundational courses to be offered in LLM, the specialized courses will cover international environmental law, national environmental laws, energy law and policies, which are the most sought after and most looked at subject these days, and adaptation to climate change. We don't call it as climate change law or climate change policies. The reason why we said and we call the subject an adaptation to climate change is because the time to really talk about climate change is over. It is a reality now, and we need to understand how we can adapt to that climate change. There is a mandatory field study along with, as part of the curriculum. And this mandatory field study is to a conservation site, mainly to demonstrate implementation of laws and policies, best practices, and sustainable living. So this could be either to Sundarbans or to one of the tiger reserves where the climate change is quite evident. So we always choose such conservation sites. We are excited that the batch of 2021 LL.M in environmental law, energy, and climate change are a group of excellent lawyers. We had an opportunity to converse with everyone, and they at least, and we realized that you are here with a clear vision on pursuing this specialization, and you know why you have chosen this field. So we are already glad that in 2021, responsible and fully skilled environmental lawyers will graduate from JGU and WWF-India, who will take environmental conservation forward for us and for many out there. We want all the students who are enrolled to study subject of environment, be it environmental sciences, law, management, or sustainability, to understand and realize that the next 1 year is going to be very crucial for environment. That's because there are a series of decisions are set to be taken that will define the direction of our planet's future. With an agreement on the new 2030 Global Biodiversity Framework, the definition of national contributions to the Paris climate targets, and the opportunity to embrace nature-based solutions under the UN Climate Convention. A new treaty on the use of living marine resources in high seas, are much talked about these days because of the plastic waste and many challenges which are posed towards the marine life. We have a chance to bring the environmental and sustainable development agendas together and deliver an ambitious and science, policy, and law-based, and we call that the New Deal for nature and people, because it has to be new. It can't be what it used to be. So I have said this in many forums before, and I will repeat myself. Let's not waste a crisis, and let's not do things in conventional manner. We have to demand change, and we should advocate for environmentally sustainable practices and green technologies which can be absorbed by nature naturally, not induced. With that, I wish all the best to lawyers and students from other streams present and listening to us. We hope to see you and interact with you face to face also very soon. So with that, I would welcome you all again to JGU and WWF-India family, and thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for those inspiring words. I now request, it's my pleasure, to invite Professor Dr. C. Rajkumar, Founding Vice Chancellor of OP Jindal Global University and Dean of Jindal Global Law School, to introduce JGU, JGLS, and the commencement speaker for today's session. Professor Raj is the guiding light for all the JGU students, and he's always willing to extend his warm support to the students. Over to you, Professor.
Thank you, Vidhi. Well, we are so proud of Vidhi here. She is not only right now working with our partner institution, WWF, but also a very distinguished alumnus of JGU and JGLS. What an extraordinary day today. I mean, think about it. Today, today we are celebrating the Teachers' Day. And I think it's absolutely important for our chief guest, Honourable Mr. Justice Michael Wilson, Judge of the Supreme Court of Hawaii, to know that the whole of India is celebrating the Teachers' Day. There is obviously a very special connection to this day for the benefit of Justice Wilson. On the 5th September every year in India, we commemorate the birthday of the second President of India, Dr. Sarvepalli Radhakrishnan, who many of us here in India know was a renowned scholar, a philosopher, and a distinguished teacher. He was also the recipient of India's highest civilian award, Bharat Ratna, and stands among the top when it comes to the immensity of his contribution to education. Dr. Radhakrishnan is one of the role models to many aspiring minds. His own life was an example of hard work, passionate commitment, and dedication to the cause of humanity and indeed enlightened citizenship. There is so much to talk about Dr. Radhakrishnan, but I want to say quickly that the fact that we are having this commencement lecture today to welcome the new batch of students who have joined the Jindal Global Law School's LL.M program, which is undertaken in collaboration with the WWF, the LL.M with specialization in environmental law, energy, and climate change, is a unique opportunity. We also particularly express our heartfelt gratitude and deep appreciation to Honourable Mr. Justice Michael Wilson for accepting our invitation to deliver the commencement lecture on the theme, Adapting the Global Environmental Laws for Effective Climate Response. I want to say that the idea of the LL.M program at Jindal Global Law School is a very important initiative. For a long time, for many of us who have studied in India, we've always lamented about the fact that most Indian law schools have largely neglected the LL.M program. They have unfortunately received stepmotherly treatment historically. So when Jindal Global Law School began its LL.M program in a very modest manner in the year 2010 and had grown from strength to strength, today we have a large community of LL.M students at Jindal. This year was very special. We have the LL.M program has grown from strength to strength, and quite remarkably, it has 3 commencement lectures. You know, no program at OP Jindal Global University has been dedicated with 3 commencement lectures. And that reflects the importance of the LL.M program that we have attached, we have given, emphasis on. We've had a commencement lecture that focuses on the LL.M which we offer on a residential mode. We completed that. We also had an LL.M blended learning program that we do in collaboration with UpGrad. We had the commencement lecture, and now today we have the LL.M in environmental law, energy, and climate change, which we are doing in collaboration with the WWF-India, and we are having that lecture. So congratulations to the incoming class of LL.M students who have taken the decision to pursue a specialized LL.M in environmental law, energy, and climate change. I want to keep this short so that we'll have more time for Justice Wilson, but I want to give you 3 things. First of all, I want to say you have taken an extraordinarily important decision in your life to have joined the Jindal Global Law School and OP Jindal Global University. While the year 2020 has posed immense challenges to the global community, for OP Jindal Global University and Jindal Global Law School, it's a very special year. On 4th March 2020, just when India was about to be attacked by this global pandemic, Jindal Global Law School was recognized as India's #1 law school, and in many ways achieved a very important global distinction to be 101 ranked law school in the entire world. Never before in the history of Indian legal education, any law school has been able to achieve such a distinction. In fact, the QS World University Rankings, when it did rank the law schools around the world, out of the 15,000 plus law schools, they only ranked 300 law schools in the world. There were only 2 Indian law schools among that 300. Jindal Global Law School was ranked 101, and the National Law School of India University, Bangalore, was ranked 151, which made Jindal Global Law School to be India's #1. And by the way, only 2 Indian law schools were in the top 300 among, as you know, the 1,650 law schools in India. So from the standpoint of the choices that you as students of the LLM in environmental law, energy and climate change you have made the right decision. A few weeks later in March, OP Jindal Global University was declared by the QS World University Rankings as India's #1 private university. They only recognized 21 Indian universities among the top 1,000 in the world, and we were declared as top 700 in the world. We jumped 100 ranks from being top 800 among the 35,000 universities in the world to top 700 in this year's rankings. These 2 recognitions make this year very special for OP Jindal Global University and Jindal Global Law School. That's the first message that I have. The second message I have is that the faculty members who have come together and the institutions that have come together in launching the LLM in environmental law, energy and climate change, and the fact that today's commencement lecture is being delivered by the person who was right there at the launch of the LLM in environmental law, energy and climate change that happened just a couple of years ago when we had Justice Wilson at the launch itself. So in a way, the bringing together of institutions such as WWF-India, Jindal Global Law School, the faculty level expertise that both institutions have advanced, and the practitioners that have come together to be able to teach in this course has made an extraordinary impact on the teaching pedagogy, as well as the program, the curriculum, the courses, the research agenda, and also the intellectually vibrant environment that this master's degree in law has provided for. I'm particularly grateful to the visionary leadership of Ms. Maulika Arabi, the advisor to the Center for Environmental Law, WWF-India, who has painstakingly worked for many years to not only develop the program, but also provided her heart and soul in advancing and fulfilling the goals and aspirations of the program. Ms. Arabi is deeply committed to advancing the cause of environmental law and also addressing the challenges that is posed by issues relating to energy and climate change. The other important aspect of this program is that very rarely specialized institutions such as WWF and universities and law schools such as Jindal come together to develop a degree program. It's one thing for institutions to collaborate when it comes to organizing conferences, lectures, workshops, and seminars. It's a totally different thing for institutions to advance the cause of a new pedagogy, an approach towards learning in which the theory and foundations of knowledge and understanding through case study and other types of pedagogical advancements is taking place in a university setting is actually being taken to the next level by those who are actually working in the field. How does issues relating to environmental law play out in courts, in advocacy situations, in relation to policy engagement, in creating new legislative interventions to develop institutional mechanisms? How do you enforce and implement the environmental laws? All these issues that are being taught and developed in the LLM program would be of great value and interest to all the students. And as you can see, this LLM in environmental law, energy and climate change has already witnessed a fantastic success. The first batch of students who graduated are already doing extremely well. And as you can see, Vidhi, who is an example of a deep commitment towards the study of environmental law, but also demonstrating the highest standards of professionalism and rectitude that has indeed attracted the attention of the WWF itself, and they have recruited her. Other students and other stories are also equally inspiring when it comes to the graduate graduates of this program. So I have no doubt that you will all excel. The third aspect of the very context of what we are doing today is actually to be part of an institution that is constantly innovating. With all humility, I can say that having studied in 5 universities around the world, starting from Loyola College and University of Madras and University of Delhi here in India, and then the University of Oxford, Harvard University, and the University of Hong Kong, I can say that one of the remarkable things about OP Jindal Global University is about constantly trying to understand the role that universities ought to play in shaping the future of young minds. In fact, as a part of today's celebration, as we celebrate the Teachers' Day, I wanted to reflect and actually read what Dr. Radhakrishnan, the former president of India, in his own words said about what a university is. And I quote, "A university is a place of higher education where the personality and capacities of the students are developed to the utmost by teachers who should themselves be at work at the frontiers of knowledge in their respective fields. The success of a university is to be judged as much by the type of graduate it turns out as by the amount and quality of research contributed by its teachers and research students. It must be clearly recognized that there is no conflict involved between the twofold function of a university to educate its members and to advance the frontiers of knowledge. The two functions are, in fact, complementary. A degree must always be what the university makes it by the kind of teaching it imparts and the type of intellectual and social life it provides for its members. If our universities are to be the makers of future leaders of thought and action in the country, as they should be, our degrees must connote a high standard of scholarly achievement in our graduates," unquote. Dr. Radhakrishnan, of course, said this several decades ago, and he had this prophetic imagination about what a university ought to be and should be. I must say that OP Jindal Global University's vision and institutional commitment and the dedication of the faculty members whose lives and contributions we are celebrating as we mark Teachers' Day today is an exemplar of what an institution can do when it comes to shaping the future of young minds and their lives as well. I also want to take this moment to recognize the importance of how institutions motivate and inspire people to achieve their fullest potential. In fact, one of the remarkable things about what a university does and what it can actually do is also its ability to create a huge impact in the minds of young people. Nobody other than Mahatma Gandhi could have captured that imagination. And I quote, "A small body of determined spirits fired by an unquenchable faith in their mission can alter the course of history." Now, of course, the university community is not as small as it used to be. We have now over 6,500 students, but also over 600 faculty members, but still relatively small compared to large universities. But this small body of determined spirits, and each one of you who are students in particular, you are part of those determined spirits, fired by an unquenchable faith in your mission, can alter the course of history. Now, what are you altering by studying this course? Well, you are addressing some of the most fundamental issues of the future of our planet. How do we determine and even decide the kind of policy choices that will ultimately help us achieve the values of sustainable development? How do we balance the felt needs of societies to advance the cause of economic and social development and removing poverty and addressing challenges of employment and providing jobs and creating physical infrastructure and building roads and bridges and all of that, along with our deep felt commitment towards protecting the environment? To what extent law as a social institution can advance the cause of protecting sustainable development, but at the same time fulfilling the goals and aspirations of a young nation? In the sense, young nation of young people, I meant. While India is a old civilization, the fact is 850 plus million people in India are less than 35 years of age. These young people, in particular the students who have joined the LL.M in environmental law, energy and climate change, you are not only going to shape the future of India, but also will be shaping the future of the world. When good part of the Western world and most parts of Eastern world, including China and Japan, would have become older, India will be younger and will be younger for a longer time. That is why the study of environmental law and its intrinsic impact and relationship between energy and climate change, a truly interdisciplinary master's degree program becomes critical. You, the students of this LL.M program, have an opportunity to shape the future. You will be part of an effort to protect the environmental rule of law, but also to be able to navigate and help people understand the difficult legal and policy choices that they have to make. These issues are not going to be easy. You will be asked to make complex decisions, and you should be able to understand complexity. It's also important for you to use different forms of judgments, including moral capacities as well as legal acumen when it comes to advancing the cause of environmental rule of law. So I can only imagine the kind of anxiety and even uncertainty that all of us are facing today in the world due to the global pandemic. But for those of you who have made the choice to be part of an institution to pursue the LL.M in environmental law, energy and climate change, today I can assure you that you will have a transformative experience. That is exactly what we hope to achieve through this program. And I would like to once again congratulate the Center for Postgraduate Legal Studies and its leader, Professor Vishwas Deveya, the Director of Law School Admissions, Professor Anand Prakash Mishra, our Executive Dean of Jindal Global Law School, Professor Srijit, the Registrar of our University, Professor Sridhar Patnaik, and of course, our own partner in this endeavor, Ms. Maulika Arabi, for their support, their imagination, their commitment, their dedication, not only as people who are connected with the law, but also who are teachers, inspiring young minds to achieve their fullest potential so that we can actually impact the life of people like Vidhi, who have achieved their fullest potential as they go through the portals of this institution. As I end what I wanted to say, I have the greatest pleasure to actually welcome my very dear friend, Honourable Mr. Justice Michael Wilson. Justice Michael Wilson was appointed by the Hawaii Supreme Court on April 17, 2014, after serving as a circuit judge of the First Circuit since May 10, 2000. As the circuit judge, he presided over Adult Drug Court, Adult Mental Health Court, and the Felony Criminal Trial Court. Justice Wilson is a founding member of the Global Judicial Institute on the Environment and very proudly the honorary adjunct professor at Jindal Global Law School of Jindal Global University in Sonipat. Prior to his appointment as a circuit court judge, Justice Wilson was a director of the Department of Land and Natural Resources, chair of the Board of Land and Natural Resources, chair of the State Water Commission, and a trustee of the Kahulawe Island Reserve Commission. He was awarded a lifetime membership in the Western Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies in 1999. Previously, he was a partner in the law firms of Pavey Wilson and Blickstein and Hart, Wolf and Wilson, where he practiced civil and criminal trial and appellate law. Justice Wilson received his law degree from Anitok School of Law in Washington, D.C. and bachelor's degree from the University of Wisconsin, Madison. Besides all of that, Justice Wilson, and I will call him Professor Wilson too, is a member of the World Commission on Environmental Law, member of the Governing Council of the Global Judicial Institute on the Environment, and member of the Climate Change Task Force for the IUCN. Most importantly, he's deeply passionate about India, has spent significant amount of time engaging with our students, our faculty, traveled across India, visited institutions and delivered lectures, traveled around the world in relation to promoting the cause of environmental rule of law, as well as addressing the challenges of climate change. We couldn't have got a better person than Honorable Mr. Justice Michael Wilson to deliver the commencement lecture. But before I do that, I am going to ask Professor Anand Prakash Mishra, the Director of Law Admissions at OP Jindal Global University and Associate Dean of Jindal Global Law School, to introduce the LL.M in Environmental Law, Energy and Climate Change class of 2020, so that Justice Wilson gets a sense of the kind of students and their lives who have actually joined this program. I'm making a slight alteration in the program so that Justice Wilson gets a glimpse of the kind of people who are listening to his lecture. We also, of course, have other students of the law school and other schools within the university. We have opened up this entire program and it is live on Facebook and YouTube. So we will be expecting a much wider audience beyond the law school's LL.M program, but also other programs in the law school and other schools of the university. Over to you, Professor Anand Prakash Mishra.
Very good morning and aloha to Justice Wilson. It's an honor and a pleasure to have someone like Honorable Mr. Justice Michael Wilson to deliver this commencement lecture to our LL.M Environmental Law, Energy and Climate Change class. This is our second batch of our LL.M Environmental Law, Energy and Climate Change program. Though we started LL.M program in 2010, but 2020 is indeed one of the most special year in our evolution as a law school when we were ranked internationally for the first time, but also our LL.M program, which has grown beyond an individual LL.M on campus for last many years to 3 different formats of LL.M program. In our LL.M Environmental Law, Energy and Climate Change program, I am extremely delighted to introduce the class to our chief guest, Honorable Justice Wilson, and our Vice Chancellor, Professor Rajkumar, our Director of Center for Postgraduate Legal Studies, our Executive Dean, our Registrar, and the faculty members who are associated here, our partner, WWF, and Ms. Maulika Arabi. It's a great moment for us to see this program becoming a prominent force in environmental law education in the whole country. This was the first LL.M program in India in environmental law, energy, and climate change. And today we have students from law schools like Nalsar University of Law, Hyderabad, West Bengal National University of Juridical Sciences, Kolkata, ILS Law College, Pune, Jindal Global Law School, Sonipat, Delhi University Faculty of Law, Calcutta University, the Karnataka State Law University, Bangalore, and University of Calcutta in India, as well as a graduate from University of Durham in the UK who have joined this program to study environmental law with Jindal Global Law School in association with WWF-India. So I will also like to say our first batch graduate, this is our actually one of those commencement lectures where an alumni is also present in Vidhi. And that's indeed a very special program for us where an alumni is presenting the inaugural class, the inaugural lecture for the next batch. I'd like to inform Justice Wilson and share with him that our LL.M class this year has been able to get students from around the country and around the world. In our LL.M residential program, we have 12 graduates from National Law School, Bangalore, from Nalsar, from NUJS, from various other national law universities, as well as some 10 or more graduates from Jindal Global Law School, from University of Delhi, from University of Mumbai, and from universities around the country. So this is indeed a great occasion, but this all happened in our LL.M education after 2013, when Center for Postgraduate Legal Studies was established after the UGC notification. So I'm thankful to University Grants Commission, which actually notified one-year LLM program in 2013, and the expert committee set up by UGC and Roundtable on Legal Education, which helped us start a one-year LLM program in India. And with these words, I know all of us are waiting to hear our very dear Justice Michael Wilson. So I would like to end my remarks and thank you so much, everyone, and all the very good wishes to all our students who have joined LLM Environmental Law, Energy, and Climate Change program. Thank you.
All right, Vidhi, you can take over the proceedings.
Thank you, Professor Raj, and thank you, Professor Anand Mishra, for those insightful sessions. I now request Justice Michael Wilson to take over the session. The floor is all yours.
Well, thank you so much, Vidhi, and congratulations to you for being a graduate of this program. And Secretary General Singh, I want to thank the Secretary General for the invitation. It's wonderful to be back with WWF-India, Professor Surjit, and my personal hero, Malika Arabi, as well as her magnificent husband, who I am privileged to once again be in the presence of. And I am very excited about being able to give this presentation. I give my regards as well to Professor Mishra and Professor Devaya, Professor Patniak, Sridhar. I am happy to be in your presence again. And also my brother and sister faculty members from Jindal Global Law School, particularly Dean Ramaswamy, and one of my, I guess I would say heroes is Professor Armin Rosenkrantz, the Dean of the Jindal School of Environment and Sustainability, who I continue to learn from. And then I always am challenged to be able to give my regards to my brother, who I don't get to see enough, the Avatar of Justice, Vice Chancellor and Dean Raj Kumar. As well, of course, I'm here to address, and very excited to do so, the 2021 batch for the LL.M in Environmental Law, Energy, and Climate Change. I should also mention my treasured student and lawyer members of the final stand, which I'll speak a bit about. So I bid all of you aloha and namaste. Aloha is our way of saying namaste and recognizing the great spirit that is in all of us, but it's a spirit that is a very powerful force in India, and it will be part of my presentation. Because let me say to those of you that are now part of the batch of the LL.M for this extremely important expertise in environmental law, energy, and climate change. And I'm hopeful that some of the first graduates of this program are also part of this audience, because I'm excited to get a chance to speak and share with you as well. I was honored to be part of the initial program in March of 2019 when the LL.M was launched, and have often thought about it and discussed it with other members of the Jindal Law School, but also members of the University of Hawaii Law School, our one law school here in the state of Hawaii. India is a place that, as Malika Arabi said, as Dean Kumar said, of course, will decide the future of our planet, for good or for bad. But that's a very broad statement. Specifically, it will be shaped by people that are equipped to deal with the issue that is the most important issue that humanity has ever faced, climate change. So let's look at the subject of this presentation for a moment and think about it. Adopting the global environmental laws for effective climate change. Effective climate change in an era that is so extraordinarily serious that I'm sure it's on the minds of every single member of the LL.M program for environmental law, energy, and climate change. Effective climate response. How can you have an effective climate response in the face of the challenges that we have all around the world from climate change? One way to do it is to adopt global environmental laws, perhaps. So in that context, let me try to give a perspective on what's happening with the world in terms of the environment and climate change, and a perspective on the role of those that are fortunate enough now to be young and going to law school and getting an LL.M. And a metaphor that is a useful one, I think, can come from the coronavirus pandemic. And this pandemic has created an extraordinary coming together of the rule of law, which I'll speak a bit about. Why has there been this united effort all around the world to address the pandemic through the law so we can hopefully save a lot of people? We can allow there to be security, allow there to be, if you will, peace moving forward. And who are the agents of the solution? Who are the agents of change for the good? We are all relying upon a very select group of, if you will, genetic engineers, molecular biologists, but they have a special expertise because they understand how to create a vaccine. There are guardians, there are protectors, and thank goodness they came along with the expertise that they have. Now you have before you a slide talking about adopting the global environmental laws for effective climate change. We've moved ahead to the Hawaiian Islands, which is fine. I'm going to say a bit about that. But for that to happen, for there to be an adapting of the global environmental laws, in other words, the use of the rule of law to have effective climate response, we need a new vanguard. We need a trained vanguard that feels at a very elemental level what Malika Arabi said, change. Change that will be the greatest change through the rule of law that probably human society has seen. So let's go to the next slide. If we can move to this slide, Najendra, it's the slide that says adopting global environmental law. I think you have to back up a bit because it's got some concepts that I'm going to cover. And the slide that says adopting environmental law covers, there you go, back one more, keep going, and keep going, and there we go, next one. And I'll tell you when we need to advance on slides. I'm sorry I haven't been doing that, but if you, there we are, okay. Adopting global environmental law. So I'm going to cover these topics today. The emergency rule of law that I would submit is upon us, and what the consequences are, suspension of rights or expansion of rights, and how the emergency rule of law is applied, whether it's applied effectively is dependent on the solution horizon that we have, which is a very limited horizon. And the judges are the emergency managers. I would suggest that we think about the judges in that way, and we'll be able to see how they're conducting themselves as emergency managers for the pandemic. And one of the tools that's unique and powerful, and I think adds to the significance of what all the members of the 2021 LL.M batch are going to be involved in. It's a suo motu jurisdiction, original jurisdiction of courts of India and particularly Bangladesh. And we'll talk about the final stand and of course, the tiger, which perhaps represents the future of the planet more than any other animal. Next slide. So here we have the Hawaiian Islands from space. We are the most remote landmass on Earth. We have 1.4 million people, which is about the same number of lawyers that India has. And we share with India a very, very close relationship about the impending future. Next slide. So in this slide, you'll see what's maybe the most iconic, well-known picture of Hawaii. And it's the place that was the most powerful natural experience I ever had when I hiked there long ago when I was in high school. And it's magnificent. So in 40 years, that beach will be gone, which creates a bit of a connection to India. That island, Kauai, which is a treasure for the whole world. You might say it's the ideal environment on Earth with the temperature that is a wonderful temperature that never gets too hot and with clean water, was just the subject of a rain bomb. That's a climate change term, but a rain bomb is rain so powerful that it's basically a bomb. So it destroyed the area behind that mountain and it took a year to rebuild it. Next slide. Here are some treasures of Hawaii that it's worth thinking about, because this is one of the things that, if we can move to the next slide, Najendra. There you have it, humpback whale, endangered species, Evie bird, that beautiful red bird, endangered species. So those species are likely to, in 40 or 50 years, either be gone or be very, very rare. Next slide. Oh, so what does Ashoka have to do with this? The rule of law. The Battle of Kalinga. 269 years before the birth of Christ, after the Battle of Kalinga, Ashoka was prepared. He was trained. He had the mindset for a fundamental change, I would suggest, that is very significantly at issue today. A change of civilization, because as you know, he came up with the rule of law, and he also introduced and spread the concept of Buddhism and this idea of treating people with respect, having freedom of religion, even treating animals with respect, was an incredibly powerful concept that helped organize the world and led to, you, I'm sure, know the very important human history that led to a mindset like Mahatma Gandhi, and for us, the leadership that we've had in the United States that deals with equal justice in many ways. Martin Luther King, as you know, was a follower of Gandhi. He didn't face an emergency. Ashoka didn't necessarily, although he overcame an emergency, I guess, when he united his kingdom and had such a bloody battle that it affected him psychologically and caused him to change and resort to peace and resort to compassion. Next slide. This individual that you'll see in the next slide does remind me of Ashoka. He has seen what you, LL.M, I would tend to call you trainees, what you have seen. He is the architect of the Paris Agreement 2015, along with Lawrence Fabius. He's probably the most noted atmospheric scientist in the world. He was knighted by the Queen of England, and he is committed to change and protecting the planet. And when he put together a 1.5 degree limit beyond which the Earth should not heat up, he did it with great anxiety and commitment. And because we have not been able to comply with the reduction in carbon that's necessary to be able to protect the planet from 1.5 degrees, it motivated him as a professor at Oxford to put together an institute that's now had a lot to do with raising $20 billion a year to be able, internationally, to be able to address what? Climate repair. And this is Sir David King. And he stands for an awakening of the future of India. And he spoke about it in China when he said, in about 40 or 50 years, 160 million people are going to leave Bangladesh because of global warming. And of course, most of them will head for India. And that's when the rule of law, as well as our global economic system, is likely to be in a state of collapse. 40 or 50 years. If you're going to use the rule of law and you're looking at a future that close in terms of losing the power of what is often described, and actually was described by my father, who of course I love, and who was a historian and a teacher of history. He described the rule of law as the most powerful force to protect civilization and to allow it to advance. And we know why. The rule of law is supposed to apply equally. It's supposed to be based on facts. To exercise that power is one of the great blessings that each of you will have when you get your LL.M. And as a judge, it's certainly a blessing as well. But we won't have that blessing necessarily more than perhaps 40 or 50 years, which is what motivates Sir David King, because he sees an existential threat. He sees an emergency that is not an emergency we can understand by comparing it to other emergencies, because it will be the greatest. Next slide. Emergency. What happens with emergency law? This is a Korematsu case in which the United States Supreme Court approved of the incarceration of Japanese people because they were Japanese during World War II, even though the 442, one of the most decorated of all fighting groups in the United States military, was risking and sacrificing their lives in World War II. But the people in the United States that were Japanese were rounded up and put in internment camps because there was an emergency. This was a suspension of rights. This was a loss of rights. And it was a learning experience, because I think those that have a sense of justice in the United States and are at all acquainted with our judicial history realize it was a big mistake and it shouldn't be repeated. Next slide. If I were to ask you whether we're all facing an emergency that the world has never seen at the moment, that has caused the world to organize as much as certainly a world war, it wouldn't be hard for you. We have a public health emergency. The pandemic has shut down Hawaii. As I speak to you, we don't have tourism. We have the greatest economic disaster in the history of Hawaii right now. The emergency is so extreme that it means that, like India, we had to have a lockdown. Right now, we're in lockdown. I am not supposed to associate with other people except in an official capacity. Quite an emergency. Next slide. Climate change is unlike any other social issue because it has an impending solution horizon. In other words, as Sir David King said, in 40 or 50 years, the change will be so dynamic and so powerful that it will very likely threaten and essentially remove institutions that our world order depends upon, rule of law, as well as our global economic system. Next slide. So let's speak a bit about the coronavirus versus the climate emergency. If you look at the emergency that's happened with the coronavirus, and you look at emergency law, and you consider the power of the rule of law when there's an emergency, and imagine that this is an emergency that's defined, the climate emergency by David King and the Secretary General of the United Nations as an emergency which humanity will not recover from. We will not return. We will not return to a state of productivity and peace. A productivity, perhaps you could even say, of justice, the productivity that allows us to have justice. Well, next slide. Okay, in the midst of this emergency, you have a group of men and women that are generally middle-aged men and women who don't come from a background of environmental study. They don't come from a background of environmental study with science, and they don't come from a background of environmental study from the law. So maybe they could use a legal device to say, it's not that bad. Maybe there could be a legal analysis that says, the rule of law can't address this issue. Of course, that is a mixed conclusion. Not all judges are coming to that conclusion. Some judges are understanding that the rule of law, more than any time in human history, is at issue here. But to understand it, they have to have a group of trained technicians, understanding the science, but understanding the law too. And this is what Dean Kumar saw coming. This is what Dean Rosencrantz saw coming. And I'm sure this is what is on the minds of associate deans like Ishan Chakravarti. But I know it's on your minds, because that's why you decided to be part of this new, powerful program. So who are you? Let's look for a metaphor. You're somewhat like those uniquely qualified engineers that we're depending upon that are the guardians of the human race because they're putting a vaccine together. Who are you? I suppose you could say you're our shepherds of the law. We're going to use this tool in a way that either surrenders rights, suppresses rights, or allows for the rights that attach in an emergency to become stronger. Our court has issued opinions. We've had a number of dissents that deal with the issue, but overall we agree. Because of the pandemic, incarcerated citizens have more rights. Their rights are strengthened because it's cruel and unusual punishment if the state doesn't act to protect them from this lethal virus when they're in the prison, especially if they're there for crimes that are nonviolent, minor crimes. So I'm asking you, the guardians, if you will, when you look at this slide, be ready to help those judges because it's hard. Why? Because as Malika says, we need change through the rule of law. It's the equivalent of the change that our country had to go through. As you probably know, we had slavery. Imagine what it was like to change from slavery. We had lawyers that had to help us through that. The Supreme Court first decided in the 1850s in the Dred Scott case that slavery was legal. We had to have lawyers come forward so women would have the right to vote. Women in the United States didn't have the right to vote until a new constitutional amendment was passed in 1920. So anyways, I honor all of you. I'm there to help you. I'm available for you because we need to be part of what you might consider to be a very nimble, a very committed, a very smart, and a very well-trained group. We have an analogy or a metaphor we use a lot in the United States. Has to do with David and Goliath. You know about David and Goliath. David is a small person. He has a slingshot. He overcomes a very angry and a very threatening Goliath, because he understands how to do it. He understands how to use a slingshot. He prevails. He's a little gorilla, much like those who put together revolutions, whether it's the group that gets together with Mahatma Gandhi and has the courage to engage in nonviolence, and they have to be strategic, and they have to be well-trained, and they have to be disciplined. And who would have ever thought that they would overcome a country like Great Britain in basically a nonviolent way? You need little gorillas to take on this very important task of convincing judges who don't have a predisposition necessarily to understand or even be that concerned about the environment. And you have to be ready for your opposition, an opposition that is going to be extraordinarily in need of leadership. And so if you bring a lawsuit and your claim is, let's move on. Your claim is in the Netherlands. You're a group of young lawyers. You bring a case on behalf of future generations. The legal community of professors essentially is looking down. They think it's wonderful and noble. They think that it's a great cause. But of course, they understand, because of their cynicism and background, that this quest on the part of these young lawyers to be able to protect future generations by forcing the government in the Netherlands to comply essentially with carbon reductions that will allow the earth to not heat up to 1.5 degrees. These young lawyers believe in it. Although the international legal community was quite skeptical, they won. That's the short story. They didn't just win at the trial level, they won at the appellate level. Next slide. And this is happening in many countries that have judges that are willing to use the rule of law. This is a slide that's slightly helpful because it names a number of different countries like Pakistan, Australia, the Philippines, that are recognizing the rights of future generations. In Pakistan, the great Justice Mansour Ali Shah allowed a villager who was essentially on the verge of dying from drought, villager who was a farmer, to bring a claim against the government and force the government to prepare and implement a climate protection plan. Australia, decision made to stop the largest coal mine that's ever been proposed because it didn't consider the effects on global warming, not just warming in Australia. And Tony Oposa, who addressed the School of Environment and Sustainability just recently, was the great lawyer that brought the case in the Philippines on behalf of future generations to stop the destruction of protected forests. But in India, the rule of law is alive. It's alive because of lawyers like Rikwit Ditta. It's alive because of lawyers like, pick the lawyer that you admire the most, because each of you must have one. MC Mehta probably comes to mind. They are where you're putting yourself, in the foxhole, on the front line, with David against Goliath. And they are bringing cases in India that has caused India to be a leader, really. As you can see from this slide, the right to the fundamental right to life, which is, I know, the archetypal provision of the Constitution of India, Article 21, has been interpreted to include the right of enjoyment of pollution-free water and air and the full enjoyment of life in the Kumar case. The cases in India are fascinating. If you haven't read the Saline versus State of Uttarakhand, you should, and maybe you already know it. But it is fascinating to have a judge say that the Ganga and the Yamuna are so important culturally and religiously that they deserve protection in their own right as a living entity. In a way, recognizing the hurt that a culture, a community, a nation feels when you have a river like the Ganga that is being polluted and destroyed. And as you probably know, the Ganga is very likely to be reduced to a trickle in 40 or 50 years. A trickle, because that's when the hothouse effect will be in full effect. The hothouse effect is about 125 degrees, 130 degrees, it's about 52 degrees centigrade. It's already, and I know one of your esteemed class members is from Calcutta. In 40 or 50 years, the atmospheric scientists say Calcutta will be treated like our city of Phoenix, which is to leave. They have to evacuate because it's so hot. Well, about that time, you know, the glaciers are going to be so diminished in the Himalayas that the Ganga is going to start diminishing. And this kind of world order change that will come very rapidly and is very much here, and it's very much an example of why the emergency that climate change poses is a greater emergency than the coronavirus pandemic, will become apparent really quickly as the Ganga starts drying up. Well, let's move to a country that has a certain amount of significance. My country. This is a statement made recently by a judge. Again, this is a judge that had a great lawyer come before her. She's a federal judge, and she made a decision that future generations have a right to bring a claim against the United States for knowingly promoting a policy to increase carbon emissions and to subsidize the burning of carbon fuels with hundreds of millions of dollars. That seems pretty straightforward, especially when you consider the complaint of this group of young people, some of whom had their houses flooded, some of whom had their houses burned down. Because as you know, the greatest threat from climate change, perhaps equivalent, maybe greater, is not just global warming, but it is extreme weather events, like our rain bomb in Hawaii, and like what's now going to be happening that's never happened before in Hawaii, which is a class 4 hurricane, over 100 miles an hour, which will blow all the windows out of the skyscrapers in Waikiki. This judge from Oregon read the materials and said, yes, there is a right, a fundamental right, a substantive due process right that these young people have under the United States Constitution, similar to Article 21 of the India Constitution, to protect their lives, All they wanted was the right to bring their claim. All they wanted was standing to come forward, like they would be able to in Australia, like they would be able to in the Philippines, like they would be able to in India. And this judge decided, as I said, that they had a claim that they would have an opportunity to take to court before a jury and prove against the United States government. Next slide. Well, we have some people in the United States, like those of you that are now part of the guardians of our planet, that are going to be equipped and trained in a way that can use the most powerful tool civilization has, namely the rule of law. We have some people like that in the United States who are law students. And when the United States Supreme Court, because apparently it has a very different way of looking at the right of future generations to protect themselves with the rule of law in federal court, when the United States Supreme Court reached down and stopped the case, many law students went to, and this is a picture of the United States Supreme Court with law students in front of it, with young people in front of it. Because if you're over 40 years old, you've got 40 or 50 years when there's going to be stability, world order, peace from rule of law, and a stable global economic system. But very quickly after that, as Sir David King would say, it's going to change. So if you're younger than 40, well, you might end up at the United States Supreme Court when you see that the US Supreme Court may end up diverging from other courts of the world on this issue. Next slide. I don't mean to make light of the age of the planet. Over 2 billion people are children. Most of them live in poverty, and they stay in poverty, and they don't get a whole lot of attention. But the children that aren't in poverty and the children that are in poverty have parents that are not going to stand for, and many of them are no longer standing for, the idea that their children are going to lose the opportunity to live a safe, peaceful life. Some of the young people are stepping forward. Now, everybody in the audience, I'm sure, knows about Greta Thunberg. Did she wait for the judges? Did she wait for the lawyers? Did she wait for the United Nations? She couldn't, because she knew unless she stepped forward, unless there was citizen action, her generation didn't have much of a chance. Recently we had a very interesting lecture. The University of Hawaii brought an author to Hawaii whose name is David Wallace Wells. And David Wallace Wells wrote a book called Uninhabitable Earth, which has now gotten traction all around the earth. He describes what's going to happen to India. He describes what's going to happen to the United States and places like the South Pacific in 40 or 50 years. And it has caused him to have, and you can write down this word that David King has, and our great scientist in Hawaii who works with David King, who's our leading expert on climate change, Professor Charles Fletcher. They have what Greta has, what David Wallace Wells has, what I would bet at least half of you in the LL.M group of guardians have: climate anxiety. Next slide. This is Jindal Global Law School with some extremely committed lawyers mixed in, and my great colleague, Sabrina McKenna, who's on the Supreme Court of Hawaii with me. And I'm looking very happy there because I'm surrounded by my heroes. This was a couple years ago. And now you see the web address. If you Google Final Stand India, that's the first website that comes up. And it has grown. The Final Stand are a group of young lawyers and young law students now from many different schools, including some in the United States, who, like Greta Thunberg, are stepping forward. They've divided India up into 4 regions. They're developing legislation, and they're planning on saving their country. If we keep going forward, we'll get to the slide with the Final Stand. There you go. And Najendra, I don't know, maybe I went too fast, but did you get Greta Thunberg? Do you want to back up and show Greta Thunberg in case we missed her? She's the one just prior to this, so people will recognize her. You can just back up one. So what about the Final Stand? I assume that maybe one of them is already part of the LL.M batch, but it just is a representation of the hope that the rest of the world has because of the legal infrastructure of India. You know, Jindal Law School just represents something that I guess you could call faith to overcome the odds if necessary. There's Greta, you see her. And you probably know she's a lady, a young woman from Sweden who has had a lot of pressure put on her. But in any case, the Final Stand, the next slide is worth spending some time looking at. And if you can write down the website, because your work Next slide, Najendra, you can move forward a slide. There you go. The work you're going to be doing is going to require you to have some people in the foxhole with you on the front line, little gorillas, those that are willing to overcome the odds, overcome some very, very powerful interests on the other side. Through what? Through the rule of law, through fairness, through justice, through pointing out the facts. And the facts are becoming more known every day. As we sit here, the environmental news that's been very shocking today is that the fires are raging so much in the Amazon that they have burned 10% of one of the most important parts of the Amazon, the biggest wetland in the world, the Pantanal. So these facts motivate and have caused, in the last week, future generations to sue the government in Brazil because they're not being protected. And if we lose the lungs of the world, the Amazon, or if we lose the Greenland ice shield, the idea of being able to keep the Earth from heating above 2 degrees becomes very unlikely. These are important scientific priorities that governments need to understand so that they can act with just as much commitment as they do for the virus, the coronavirus. Next slide. So if we were to imagine, as we have to, what you're going to do, you, the guardians, or you, I guess, the young Davids, or you, the trained technicians, like the ones that are engineering vaccine, committed team that works every day to save the human community from the virus by engineering a vaccine. If you think about what you want to have happen, then you're taking a necessary step. It won't happen without your dream, your commitment. Hard work, but incredibly inspiring work. But you've got to think about the time element that drives David King and caused him to raise this money and put together an institute at Oxford, that drives David Wallace Wells to write this book. You've got to think about the timing that has caused Greta Thunberg to step forward, and it's happening as we speak in a way that's growing very fast, and new organizations are forming. If you haven't already looked up the kind of citizen action that's taking place all around the world, you should, because they'll be there for you. But they need you. They need the trained technicians to be able to move forward, to bring the cases in front of these judges that, like the dinosaurs, are thinking, holy smokes, I didn't sign up for this. Oh my goodness, this issue is so difficult. Why is it difficult? It's not difficult legally. If I ask you, do you have a duty to forego actions that will foreseeably cause injury? That's an easy one for you. And then if I add to that, the action that is foreseeable that you are engaging in will create the biggest injury that the human race has ever had, you would think that would be straightforward. But in the United States, there are certain doctrines, one of which is being applied in Juliana right now. The appellate court reversed Ann Aiken. The Ninth Circuit reversed Ann Aiken. It was a split decision. Fortunately, you had one judge that was making the point, of course, future generations can bring this action. This is what the rule of law is all about. But the other two judges were saying, well, climate change is a problem, but the remedies are so complex. The remedies are so difficult for us to conceive, and they're so broad-based, and they're not just nationally based, and they're internationally based, that this is beyond the work of the courts. This is more of a political question. Well, now that appellate court has to reconvene with 9 judges instead of 3, and they're going to consider it. But then it will go to the United States Supreme Court. And one of the reasons that I'm here today, and one of the reasons that I'm talking about vision, thinking about the future, is because your participation in this issue in the next 5 or 10 years could affect what happens in the United States. Next slide. I don't know if you've heard of suo jurisdiction. Next slide. But there it is. A court, I'm sorry, we need to back up for a second. A court can exercise its own authority in India where there's an emergency, and it has done so, as you probably know. It's done so to stop pollution. It's done so to intervene when there have been actions taken that are clearly life-threatening. For example, the mining of coal by hand by young boys, where they were not only dying young, but also contaminating the aquifer, the water aquifer for villages. Well, in any case, the courts are used to exercising power. The courts are used to being creative with remedies in India. And the other thing that the courts are used to, when you have a group that's making a final stand, when our students, our young people went to the federal court and made their final stand, they're having a lot of problems staying in court. When the final stand is made in India, when the students, the young people, the young lawyers are before the judges of India, next slide, they're going to be with a group that is used to access to justice, used to allowing people to bring their claims, very flexible when it comes to public interest litigation, and that have a sense of duty and have a sense of justice that is profound. And the Supreme Court of India had the kind of concern about the plight that we had in Hawaii with our environmental problems, that the Chief Justice of India came, along with Justice Sakri, along with Justice Kumar, who are in this picture. Chief Justice Takar came to Hawaii, spoke to our law students, spoke to our lawyers, talked about the history of the court, even though it's a relatively young court in a way. You know, your Constitution was passed in 1949. So you have leaders, judicial leaders, next slide, who are incomparable. And you can't lose sight of that. You can't give up. You can't think because India is so big and maybe there is a corruption in some places, or maybe there are places in which courts are making decisions for the wrong reasons, because the big picture is this is a magnificent group of decision makers. And of course, this is one of the great justices in the entire world that you have the good fortune of having on your court, Justice Chandrachud. But he comes from a background of faith. He comes from a background of connection to the earth. He comes from a background where it's comfortable to say that the rule of law would do what the Constitution of India requires, which is protect the life by protecting the environment. I have just about 2 slides left, and the next slide represents India in many ways to me. Next slide. There you go. My brother, Dean Raj Kumar, knows how much I care about tigers and how much I wanted to find a wild tiger. And we worked at it for a couple of years. And I was with him. He finally helped me, and we found this wild tiger. Why is a tiger so magnificent? Because it represents people like Justice Chandrachud. It represents people like Raj Kumar. It represents people like each of you that had the courage to enter this program and get these critically needed tools when this is a new program, when this is a brave program. So you are on the cutting edge of being the guardians of this planet in a way that is well equipped. And if we can have tigers especially in an old country like India, especially in a crowded country like India. It means there's an ethic that's demonstrated through the rule of law that, as Malika Arabe said, can translate into the kind of change that for India can happen. Change in India, where there is respect for the environment enough so that you can make the adjustments to be able to protect the atmosphere, reduce carbon emissions, go to different forms of transportation, use different forms of agriculture. The creativity, the talent, the commitment, the faith is inspiring, and it has become an iconic symbol through the Jindal Global Law School and the Jindal University, because that's what it stands for. And the reason that it managed to catapult itself to being like you, members of the LL.M group, like you, to be in the vanguard, to say we can have justice, we can have honesty, we can have transparent government, we can move forward in a way in which we can be proud and lead the world, takes on truth. Look how it happened. That kind of broad, altruistic vision worked. And now you're part of an institution that, as young as it is, only 10 or 11 years old, is one of the leading institutions in the world on what? Okay, you have good teachers and you have good curriculum. No, it has to do with heart. It has to do with spirit. It has to do with commitment and courage to say sometimes things that maybe aren't politically popular, that lead to justice. Next slide. So it does take vision. This is, you probably recognize this rather young looking person that I have my arm wrapped around. You know, the last time I was lucky enough to put my arms around a lot of people, to shake the hands of a lot of people, was this last March. I was at WWF with you, with many of you. I was at WWF in a way that I will never forget, because I was putting my arms around people, shaking hands. You know, there were hundreds of people at the conference. We all were committed to making sure that there is an environment for future generations, and that the connection of humanity to its God, its creator, is something that is recognized in a way that's real. But that was right at the beginning of the pandemic. And I got on the plane and left. You someday, maybe Dean Kumar will tell you what an adventure it was for me to actually get on the plane in the United States and get to India. But anyways, I got on the plane and came back to Hawaii. I had to be quarantined at that point. And ever since then, I haven't been able to have the experience that I had in India. And it's not just a matter of, you know, putting my arms around my friends. It's a matter of seeing that no matter what, no matter how many poor people there are, no matter how much there's a struggle, there's a sense of heart and spirit and faith there that can really lead the world. And I'll conclude with this idea of an emergency. As we saw, you can use an emergency to trap and imprison an entire race of people. Right? Like Korematsu, when we put Japanese people in internment camps. When there's an emergency, you can act like our court tried to with the pandemic and say, under the Constitution of the United States, citizens have a right to be free from cruel and unusual punishment. And if you've committed a minor crime and you're put into custody in an atmosphere in which it's likely you're going to catch this lethal coronavirus, that's unconstitutional. So the emergency empowers. The emergency is not something that allows government to say, well, it's an emergency, so we're going to leave the inmates in the prison so that they fend for themselves with the virus. What am I saying? An emergency can advance you towards humanity. An emergency can advance you towards the ideals of Mahatma Gandhi. An emergency can advance you towards the ideals of Jindal Global University. But it takes work. It's not easy, and you need to have people who are committed and trained to be able to do that. And there is no greater emergency, a more pressing challenge than to try to keep the Earth from heating up to 2 degrees. Right, 2 degrees. The Paris Agreement was put together and all the world got together to agree to get enough carbon out of the air to keep the Earth from heating up to 1.5 degrees to be able to avoid the catastrophe at 1.5 degrees. We have continued to put carbon in the air in such a volume that it looks like we aren't going to be able to keep the Earth from heating up to 1.5 degrees. And those countries that are going to be damaged the most, it's up for grabs. So our little state will be very damaged. And when you have 120 million people moving from Bangladesh towards India, it will make a big difference for India too. So we're with you in Hawaii, but we want to follow you. The final stand is alive and well in Hawaii, and it's alive and well in India. There will be people stepping forward, but I am excited about the vanguard, the front line, the guardians, if you will, the Davids against the Goliaths that are being trained by Dean Rosencrantz, by Malika Arabi, by Vidha Thakral, by Ishan Tatrivedi. You have a team, you have a collection, you have a group that I hope will stand together, because it's going to get more and more of an adventure, more and more of an emergency, and the emergency needs to lead us towards the improvement of humanity and the protection of the planet. So that's the end of my long-winded presentation. I am always grateful to be involved in discussions with my friends and my family from India, and particularly Jindal. And I almost felt like I just wanted to continue to listen to Professor Kumar and to Malika Arabi rather than give my presentation, but I agreed to do it. So thank you all very much, and aloha and namaste. Remember, you're all welcome in Hawaii, and I'm here to help every one of you that's in this LL.M program. And congratulations. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Mike, for that absolutely inspiring and comprehensive tour de force on the very evolution of issues that are confronting the, the world of environmental law and energy and climate change and sustainability. We have a number of questions that have come, and I'm going to ask those questions to you. So if you permit me, I'm going to ask those questions to the extent we can. We have some time left. So one of the questions that has come is that, to what extent we are in a position to impact, environmental change, including addressing the challenges of climate change through the law. This question possibly is also to address the law and politics of environmental protection. And so you are, of course, at a vantage point as a judge, but then you are no ordinary judge. You understand politics and governance and law quite keenly. So this question would resonate with the students when it comes to how do they use law effectively to address issues relating to environment.
Oh, thank you, Raj. And it reminds me, I know that my article has been circulated, and you're all welcome to take a look at the Law Journal article that I wrote that addresses that issue. Because yes, we're in a position to create change. We are poised in a position where humanity is going to resort to the courts for a while, and they are. All through Europe, the courts are starting to fall into line to take action to regulate carbon. I gave you examples of what's happening even in Pakistan. So there's no question that we can do it, but there's also no question that it is under the greatest legal struggle that humanity has ever had, because we have to move fast. You only have if you look at the window in which we have to get sufficient carbon out of the air, the amount of time that we have, it might well be 8 or 9 years. So there's no question, because the facts are there, the scientists are there, the Nobel laureates are lining up. And if you take somebody in a position like the Supreme Court of India, or in the Supreme Court of the United States, or the Supreme Court of Hawaii, you can order, like the Supreme Court of India did, that there's no longer going to be any diesel engines in New Delhi. You can just think of remedies. Think of the remedies that are available. I mean, in the United States, one federal judge can shut down an entire industry. So if you are producing DDT, which is a very poisonous insecticide we had in the United States for a long time, then if it's a nationwide operation, the federal court can just shut it down. A jury in the United States, if the future generations allowed to get their case to a jury can shut down the biggest company in the world by issuing a judgment that says you have to go out of business because of the effect that you're having on the welfare of the planet. I mean, the rule of law is something that's really important for everybody who's in this program. And of course, any lawyer that's thinking about the environment to keep in mind, because the judges can keep it small. They can keep your remedies small. But at a certain point, the judges that aren't ready and aren't equipped will be replaced. And also, there are judges, like you already have on your Supreme Court, there are many of them that I think would be willing to take the action that's necessary and required under the law to provide a remedy. So in answer to that question, are the courts able to, are they poised to, are we in a position to be able to do something? Just keep thinking about remedies, because those remedies are definitely there. And you have to believe it. Unless you believe that we can do it, it won't happen, because it's a small group that's got to be the guardians, the Davids, the ones that are going to believe in themselves and go forward. Ritwik Dida is a good example. He doesn't give up. MC Mehta, oh my goodness, can you imagine what MC Mehta was up against when he first started? So don't get me started, but I have great confidence that we can do this through the rule of law with the facts from these great scientists like David King. Just as an aside, David King testified in a case. He's the most eminent scientist in Great Britain. He's on the television more than any other scientist talking about the pandemic. He was asked by, have you heard of Extinction Rebellion? Extinction Rebellion is a group of activists that do things like glue themselves to the airport. They have middle-aged ladies that glue themselves to the airport because they're trying to make the point that we've got to do something about all this carbon that the planes are putting in the air, and they got prosecuted criminally. And David King was asked to testify on their behalf. This is it's a nonprofit that has very little money. David, you can imagine how much he gets charged an hour if he's a consultant. So he did it for free. He testified about what's happening with the science, and the judge threw the case out. So there are exciting examples of how the rule of law can prevail.
Thank you very much, Mike, for that. Mike, there's another very interesting question about, how does environmental lawyers and environmental people who are connected to the environmental law practice, get their voices in institutional mechanisms which may not necessarily favor that space easily. At the heart of the question is that, how do you bring environmental thinking at a policy level priority? Now, one of the things that has happened, if you see today, is that the global pandemic has a unique form of immediacy, which has brought in attention to people when it comes to prioritizing global public health. Of course, we don't know what will happen after, let's say, we find a vaccine and we have a cure. But quite differently, the environmental crisis is unfortunately at times invisible, at times slowly visible. Now, in that context, how do the environmental lawyers, particularly the graduates, the future students of environmental LL.M in environmental law, energy and climate change, how do they make their voices felt?
Well, thanks for that question, because I know it's something that a lawyer has got to feel confident about their strategy. Going to ask them about strategy. Okay, how can you develop a strategy or pursue a strategy that allows you to have impact on policy? Let me give you two examples. One is immediacy. Dean Kumar talked about immediacy. Immediacy. Okay, I know very, very influential lawyers and very, very influential scientists who are totally committed to this issue for a reason that will give us all great hope and make us feel good about the human character. Those three people are totally committed because of their children. If you're a parent and your child has to stay inside because the air is too dirty, that's pretty immediate. But if your child has to stay inside, the air is too dirty, and the scientists are saying your child, even with sacrificing staying inside and studying, or staying inside and not being able to recreate with their friends, even with that sacrifice, the future is going to be a devastating one. That's enough immediacy that it's starting to affect influential parents. That's my point. Very influential parents. So you will have an audience as you move forward with the rule of law and point out the facts. The second example has to do with the people that I call the giants, the companies that I call the giants. You know, you've got David, he's a little gorilla, and he's got to go up against a giant Goliath. All giants aren't the same. If you are a giant, say, a giant like Google, you're a giant like Amazon. You have a lot of smart people studying the world economy. And those people see it coming. They don't want to lose their market. They don't want to lose their business. This is not anymore a complex analysis about what's going to happen to the Earth on the present trajectory. At 2 degrees, it is such a devastating thing that those big companies don't want it to happen. So what is it that Jeff Bezos in the last 2 months decided he was going to do with respect to climate change? He's going to now donate $1 billion. James Thornton, you look up Client Earth, it will give you a great hope. James Thornton's a lawyer. He was an environmental lawyer. He started this organization because he wanted to protect the planet, guard the planet. He's a man of great integrity. He's a very thorough person. He's very kind. He's very humble. And he created this national law firm that's now funded by high wealth organizations, high wealth individuals. And his law firm, Client Earth, continually wins cases in Europe to force the government to comply with regulations against the emissions of fossil fuel. This is why the rule of law can't be underestimated. If you think about it, you can make it happen. And there are people that are going to want to help you that are giants. They're giants, but you have to find them, and they will find you if you do a good job. James Thornton is a winner. He's committed. He's wonderful. He's humble. He's the kind of person you want to work with. He has the values of Jindal Global Law School. So any one of you, and I'm not saying this so that you have unfounded motivation. I'm sincere. Every one of you can convince a high wealth individual to fund, and then fill in the blanks, however you want to approach it. If you're going to have a nonprofit that represents young people, or you're going to bring actions that are, corporate actions that have to do with shareholder derivative actions, whatever. But that's the way to do it. Just go for the part of the community that needs you. And believe me, if you are in an industry that's not involved in necessarily benefiting from putting a lot of carbon in the air, you do not want to see the Earth get to 2 degrees. And it's very likely to get to 2 degrees. We might be able to hang on at 2 degrees. Calcutta probably won't, but there'll be other cities and there'll be migrations. I don't know what's going to happen in the frontier between Bangladesh and India, but at 2 degrees, there might still be enough world stability. We'll see.
Thank you so much, Mike, for that. Mike, what are the things that many students who pursue the study of environmental law are constantly, let's say, have to deal with their own future professional aspirations? Is that to what extent they will be having professional opportunities, including in the practice of environmental law, be it in the context of the law firm or litigation or environmental organizations. So it'll be nice if you can reflect a bit about what after the LLM, what are the possible, let's say, career trajectories and opportunities that may be available. I know you don't need to speak in the Indian context, you can speak more on the global context, but essentially to make our students be more comfortable when it comes to the choices they end up making, because as you know, there is enormous pressure within the legal profession to actually end up choosing certain areas of specialization that are more focused on corporate and financial and trade and investment and IP and all of that, and not necessarily on issues relating to environmental law.
Well, Raj, in many ways, you're more experienced in the career opportunities for young lawyers. But I've been fortunate to have law clerks and work with nonprofits and, of course, bring cases against big companies and do trial cases and do cases in appellate courts and, work with judges all around the world. So I have to say that the answer I want to give is we're talking about a select group who has courage. We're talking about a select group that believes in social justice. We're talking about a select group that becomes a lawyer to improve society or protect animals, or protect the planet, whatever. It is a kind of altruistic concept, much like your motto at Jindal, which is anyways. You do it anyways. You do it because it's right. That's all. You do it because it's right. So I'm tempted to answer that way, which is, if you can't go through life that way, it's okay. Some people, they go to law school, they have a child, two children, 3 children, and a wife, they have to support them. So maybe they wouldn't be positioned to necessarily pursue this, but it's different now. Actually, if you want to make a very good living, this is the area to go into, because it is going to be, to look at what David King raised $20 billion in a few years. What's the money being used for? It's being used to protect the planet, come up with certain ideas, such as ways to refreeze the Greenland ice shield. For that to happen, you've got to have the biggest law firms in the world putting the paperwork together, the biggest law firms in the world doing the regulatory work. This is an international project of epic proportions. And if you've been trained as an LL.M student at Jindal, you have unique, unfortunately, there aren't that many people that are going to have your training and your skills. You'll be unique. So there are major changes taking place economically. And then it may be that you're able to also connect with one of the many NGOs that are going to become extremely successful financially. Jeff Bezos isn't going to give his funding to Jindal Harvard, Yale, so they can study climate change. We're beyond that. That's what this whole presentation's about. We've got the law, we've got the infrastructure, but what is it that characterizes what we're talking about here today? What is the one word that characterizes what we're talking about today? Emergency, emergency, epic emergency, existential emergency. So Jeff Bezos or Mark Zuckerberg, I don't know, or Mr. Tata, they want to have a future, and they are likely to invest in an NGO, in a group like, you know, Ritwik did his NGO, practiced environmental lawyers. And so you could find a shift of resources soon. That's a very powerful shift.
Great. Thank you so much, Mike, for that. We have, of course, questions about, you know, there's a question from Krishnaswamy Parameshwar who's asking, you have written about judges as water trustees. What, in your opinion, are the specific potential, let's say, responsibilities of judiciary as an institution when it comes to protecting the environment? In the sense that to what extent judges and judiciary can play a leadership role when it comes to not only issues relating to water, but even beyond.
This is just such an important concept with this question, because it gets back to remedies. Really, what can the court do? It's got limited jurisdiction. Remedies, what difference can a judge make at that level? Okay, here's an example. In the United States, under our Constitution, we have a concept of, you could call it equal protection. Okay. And this rather extraordinary human being, whose father was a slave, who went to a law school that was basically a black law school, started representing black people. And the NAACP, the National Association of Colored People, was created, and he became one of their lawyers. Poor lawyer, not making much money. And he was threatened so much with the work that he was doing on behalf of discrimination against black people that at one point they had to drive him out of town in a hearse. You know, a hearse, as you probably know, it's a vehicle you put a corpse in and you take it to a funeral. So you wouldn't expect in a hearse that you would find a person in a coffin that's alive. And so that's how he managed to get out of town. His name was Thurgood Marshall. So he had a case before the Supreme Court that was, and it's still criticized to some extent. It's always entertaining to hear those and try to come up with a reason why this case wasn't a successful one. But in any case, his position was separate but equal violates the concept of equal protection under the law. So you can't have laws that say that black people can't, and then fill in the blanks. They can't go to certain restaurants, they can't go to certain bathrooms, they can't go to certain schools. But as long as they can go to a school and a bathroom and in a restaurant, it's okay. But separate but equal is okay. And he challenged that and he won. He convinced these men on the US Supreme Court, I don't think there are any women at that time, who were from the establishment or from the status quo. He convinced them this gets me to the point of the question, that all the schools in the United States have to be desegregated. Now that's an awkward remedy. Really? You've got these 9 people that decide that the United States government isn't supposed to allow this kind of discrimination. And then what are we going to do about it? We've got 300 million people in the United States. What are these 9 people going to do? You could make the argument that a court would never do that. That's one of the most proud cases in the history of the United States. And that person, as you probably know, Thurgood Marshall, again, if you think that you can predict that mere power is always going to prevail, regardless of whether it's power being used for good or not, this is a good story, because that's not true. Thurgood Marshall ended up
Right.
on the United States Supreme Court. So courts can take action. Now in the climate context, as I said, look, I mean, at a certain point, you may have a case that requires the court to determine whether in a 30 or 40 years, you're going to have the economy collapse. Let's say a judge is convinced of that. The economy is going to collapse if a certain practice continues by the United States government, like, for example, subsidizing fossil fuel emissions. So what could the court do? That's it. Shut it all down.
Excellent. Well, we all good things need to come to an end. And
oh, no, that's too bad, Raj. I was hoping you had more questions.
Well, you know, we could have you for the whole day, Mike, and we have to move you to.
Do you think there's anybody left in the audience?
There are many. I mean, you'll be, yeah. In fact, the beauty of what you said is that not only you connected to the students and faculty, but also most importantly, the students of LL.M who have joined the program have many of these questions and concerns as they think about the future. And you have so beautifully and very compellingly, in a very inspiring manner, addressed it. Before I invite my colleague, Professor Vishwas Devya, to introduce the program, I want to personally express my heartfelt gratitude and deep appreciation for you to have spent over 2 hours of your, it must be Friday evening there, for you to be with us. Thank you so much, Mike. Now I have great pleasure in inviting Professor Dr. Vishwas Devya, the Director of the Center for Postgraduate Legal Studies and Vice Dean of Jindal Global Law School, to introduce the Center for Postgraduate Legal Studies.
Thank you, Raj. Thank you, Justice Wilson, for a riveting, discussion on the topic. I'll also take this opportunity to thank Ms. Mollika and Vidhi. Both Professor Raj and Professor Anand have actually kind of said quite a few things about Center for Postgraduate Legal Studies. I would like to keep my talk very brief, just to kind of introduce what the aim of CPGLS has been, or what Center for Postgraduate Legal Study does. The Center for Postgraduate Legal Studies is established primarily to offer advanced and interdisciplinary teaching, learning and research opportunities in law, even at the master's level. The CPGLS is committed to provide an intellectually stimulating academic environment with highly qualified, experienced, and dedicated faculty members committed to provide an excellent and world-class legal education. And as part of our aim, we like to blend theory with practice, and our partnership with WWF enhances this vision of blending practice with theory. And we've done it in an effective manner for 1 year, and we hope to do this in the coming years too. So it is not merely the classroom pedagogies that make this environmental law program special, but the uniqueness comes with the field studies that make it an enriching experience. I hope the students of the 2020 LL.M in environmental law, climate change, and energy laws have enriching experience, and you make the most out of hopefully a possibility of going in for a field study if the environment kind of allows all of us to kind of take you for a field study. Enjoy the journey, and I hope the next 12 months are going to be fairly enriching. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Vishwas. We are now moving towards the concluding segment of today's lecture. I now request Professor Sridhar Patnaik, Registrar of OP Jindal Global University, to make the concluding remarks. I would also like to mention that Professor Patnaik has always supported the students as Director of CPGLS earlier, and now as Registrar. Over to you, Professor Patnaik.
Thank you so much, Vidhi, and good afternoon, everyone. And Justice Wilson, good evening. What a pleasure listening to you as the Vice Chancellor rightly mentioned, we could go on and on forever, but nonetheless, we do have some constraints. But I must make a very quick mention. What all you made as part of your presentation or the commencement lecture, there is a sense of purpose, there is a sense of commitment, but most importantly, there is a sense of joy. And that is the main and the important message to all these students, and what students and each one of us, including myself, can learn from you, because purpose, commitment, and joy is what is needed. And it's all the more needed when one is engaging with areas like nature, environmental studies, so on and so forth. And if one conceptualizes the entire talk, the most important takeaway is to focus on the fundamentals. And the fundamentals are what are the problems and what is causing that particular problem, and what can or what should we all together do about it as lawyers or even as scientists or whatever disciplines we are coming from. But as we all agree, worldly solutions may not have worldly problems may not have immediate solutions, but what we need is a method, an approach towards improved technologies, policies, regulations, or whatever in terms of a framework. And all of this would require that we have a firm foundation of ideas in relation to environment, or ideas in relation to environmental thought, so that we have a kind of a balance between what is popularly called as the debate and the dialogue between biocentrism and anthropocentrism. And my dear students, this is what you can expect by being a part of this program at the Center for Postgraduate Legal Studies, Jindal Global Law School, offered in collaboration with the Center for Environmental Law, WWF-India, and the lecture delivered by Justice Wilson this morning. It set the right kind of a platform for you to carve out a map, a vision for yourself to acquire the specific skills and the competencies necessary to evolve as an environmental lawyer, as a thinker, and all of which is going to be in consonance with your responsibilities as a graduate student, and also something that's going to fall in place in consonance with the graduate attributes of the OP Jindal Global University. So I would like to say that this particular platform is what you can make use of to make your classes more discursive, more engaging, and lively, because all of you are lawyers too, with some years of experience in terms of having either read for LLB or even having worked as a lawyer or in some other capacity post your LLB. So it's going to be a very enriching experience learning from one another, and all of us together can create some kind of interesting times to contribute to humanity and to the discussions on the promotion and protection of environment, so that we all walk the kind of ideal path, which interestingly was mentioned by the commencement speaker yesterday at the School of Environment and Sustainability, the Philippines lawyer and activist, Mr. Oposo. So you are having all the opportunities in terms of the courses, the pedagogical approaches, and even the curricular opportunities, because the program is well placed in partnership with the WWF, and we are thankful to them for all their intellectual and social capital. And also the program is well placed because we do have intellectual resources coming from not only the law school, but also the School of Environment and Sustainability. So these are great times to read and study environment, but also these are responsible times to think more about environment and to come up with innovative approaches and solutions for protection of humanity. So I thank each one of you for being a part of this lecture. And I also thank the commencement speaker, Justice Wilson, a great friend of the university and our supporter, for his constant guidance, because Justice Wilson is also a member of the Program Advisory Committee of the LL.M in Environmental Law, Energy and Climate Change. And he also took time to be with all of us at the launch of this grant program a year ago in March 2019, along with Justice Sabrina McKenna, his colleague, and Justice Dr. Chandrachud, Judge of the Supreme Court of India, and Justice Deepak Gupta, Judge of the Supreme Court of India, former, and the former chairperson of the National Green Tribunal, Justice Swatantra Kumar. So it's a grand start, and now we are into the second batch, and we are hopeful that you all will get benefited out of the opportunities that are going to be provided to you. Last but not the least, I thank all my colleagues at the Jindal Global Law School of the OP Jindal Global University, and including the offices of the Admissions and Outreach, and even the Office of the Information Technology and Communication Services, and everyone who made this particular occasion possible. Thank you so much to each one of you at JGU and WWF. And thanks once again, Justice Mike Wilson. I wish you all a great academic year ahead. The program has ended now.
Thank you so much, Sridhar. Quick question, Mike. I want to get a thought from you. You see, we would like to explore the possibility of internship opportunities for our LL.M environmental law, energy and climate change students at both the World Commission on Environmental Law and the Global Judicial Institute on the Environment. You don't need to answer this question now, but I want you to keep in mind, I will formally write to you to explore such an opportunity for our students as sort of an internship program.
I think that's an excellent idea. And I also wanted to mention, Raj, I'm more than happy to participate at moments that you think are important during the curriculum of the candidates for the LL.M. Participate in any type of a roundtable or a kind of discussion session if there are particular issues that I could be helpful on.
Excellent. Great. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. Take care. Be safe.
Congratulations.